The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust, and Victoria Holloway clutched her single valise with trembling hands as she stared out at the sun-baked main street of Cottonwood Springs. April 1875 felt like the beginning of a new life, or at least it was supposed to. The small frontier town in the Arizona Territory seemed a far cry from the prosperous settlement her betrothed had described in his letters. Victoria smoothed her travel-worn dress and adjusted her bonnet as the driver opened the door. At 22, she had left everything behind in Boston: her position as a schoolteacher, her modest boarding room, and the painful memories of parents lost to influenza 3 years prior. All for the promise of marriage to a man she'd never met. "Cottonwood Springs, madam," the driver announced, offering his hand to help her down. Victoria stepped onto the dusty street, her high-buttoned shoes immediately collecting a layer of the fine reddish soil. The town was smaller than she'd expected, just a single main street with wooden buildings on either side: a general store, saloon, small church, and what appeared to be a sheriff's office. A few curious onlookers had paused to watch the stage's arrival. "Mr. Douglas Weatherby?" she asked the driver. "Could you direct me to his residence?" "I'm his intended." The word felt strange on her lips. The driver's expression shifted. Something like pity crossed his weathered face. "Madam, I think you ought to speak with Sheriff Taylor. His office is just there." He pointed to a building with a wooden star hanging above the door. Victoria's stomach twisted with apprehension. "Is something the matter with Mr. Weatherby?" "Best speak to the sheriff, madam," he repeated, busying himself with unloading the remaining luggage for the other passengers. With her heart hammering in her chest, Victoria made her way to the sheriff's office. Inside, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache looked up from his desk. "Sheriff Taylor?" she inquired. "Yes, madam. What can I do for you?" "I'm Victoria Holloway. I've come from Boston to marry Douglas Weatherby." The sheriff's face fell. He removed his hat and stood. "Miss Holloway, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. Douglas Weatherby passed away 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia took him quick-like." Victoria felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. "But I just received a letter from him last month." "Yes, madam." It came on rather suddenly. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Did you not receive the telegram I sent to Boston?" "No," Victoria whispered. "I was already traveling." 3 weeks on the road, changing trains and stagecoaches, all to arrive at a destination where no one awaited her. "I'm mighty sorry about this. Truly am." The sheriff gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. Would you like some water?" Victoria sank into the chair, still clutching her valise. "What am I to do now?" "Well, do you have means to return east?" She shook her head. "I spent nearly everything I had on the journey here." Panic began to rise in her chest. "Mr. Weatherby and I had an arrangement. He paid for my passage in exchange for my becoming his wife." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I understand, Miss Holloway, but I should tell you something else about Douglas. He wasn't exactly well established here. He had debts. The bank's taken possession of his homestead. But in his letters, he described a successful ranch, cattle. Douglas had a talent for exaggeration," the sheriff said gently. "He owned a small plot outside town with a half-built cabin and 2 milk cows. No ranch to speak of." Victoria felt tears threatening. Not only was she alone in a strange town, but she'd been deceived as well. "Is there lodging in town?" "Someplace I might stay while I figure out what to do next. There's Mrs. Perkins' boarding house. But I should warn you, Cottonwood Springs isn't used to unmarried ladies arriving alone." "I'll manage," Victoria said with more confidence than she felt. By sundown, she had secured a small room at the boarding house with her remaining funds enough for 2 weeks if she was frugal. Mrs. Perkins had eyed her suspiciously but accepted her money with a sniff. That evening, Victoria sat at the boarding house dinner table with 4 other boarders, all men who worked various jobs in town. Their curious stares made her uncomfortable as Mrs. Perkins announced to everyone exactly why Victoria had come to Cottonwood Springs. "Another one of Weatherby's tall tales claiming victims," muttered one man between bites of stew. "At least this one's prettier than the last girl he lured out here," another commented with a laugh. Victoria's cheeks burned. "There were others?" "Just one," Mrs. Perkins said as she refilled water glasses. "Left on the next stage out. Had more sense than to stay." "I don't have funds to leave immediately," Victoria admitted, wishing she hadn't spoken. A round of meaningful glances circled the table. "Well," said a balding man who'd introduced himself as the town's barber, "there's always work at Mabel's place for a young woman." The other men snickered. Victoria didn't know what Mabel's place was, but the men's reactions told her enough. She stood abruptly. "If you'll excuse me, I've had a trying day." In her small room, Victoria finally allowed herself to cry. What a fool she'd been, thinking she could escape loneliness and build a new life through letters and promises from a stranger. Now she was stranded, nearly penniless, and already the subject of town gossip. The next morning, Victoria dressed in her finest remaining outfit, a blue calico dress with white collar, and set out to find work. The general store seemed the most appropriate place to begin her search. The storekeeper, Mr. Wilson, listened to her request with pursed lips. "No positions available, miss. My wife handles the accounts, and my son stocks the shelves." The same response greeted her at the small hotel, the restaurant, and even the laundry. By midday, Victoria stood outside the schoolhouse, her last hope. The town's teacher, a pinch-faced woman named Miss Granger, didn't bother to hide her disdain. "We have no need for another teacher, especially one who comes to town under such circumstances. I assure you, my circumstances are simply unfortunate, not improper," Victoria replied, struggling to maintain her dignity. In a town this size, Miss Holloway, unfortunate and improper amount to the same thing in the eyes of parents. "Good day." With each rejection, whispers seemed to follow her down the street. She caught fragments, Weatherby's girl and mail order bride, and probably made up her teaching credentials too. By the end of the day, Victoria sat on a bench outside the general store, fighting back tears. A young woman approached, perhaps 18 or 19, with a kind face and simple dress. "You're Miss Holloway? I'm Lily Carter, Mrs. Perkins' niece. She sent me to find you, said you hadn't returned for the midday meal." "I'm not hungry," Victoria mumbled. Lily sat beside her. "Don't let them get to you. This town can be unkind to newcomers, especially." She trailed off. "Especially foolish women who travel across the country to marry men they've never met," Victoria finished bitterly. "I was going to say especially women who show up with no connections. Connections mean everything here." Victoria sighed. "I have no connections, no prospects, and after 2 weeks, no roof over my head." "Perhaps you could write to someone back east?" "Family." "There's no one," Victoria admitted. "My parents are gone, and I have no siblings or close relatives." They sat in silence for a moment before Lily spoke again. "There's to be a town social tomorrow evening at the church. You should come. Maybe you'll make some friends." Victoria doubted it, but nodded anyway. "Thank you, Lily. You're very kind." The social proved to be even more uncomfortable than Victoria had anticipated. She stood alone near a table of refreshments while townsfolk openly stared and whispered. Women pulled their husbands away when Victoria approached, and even the pastor gave her only the briefest of welcomes. "Don't mind them," came a deep voice behind her. Victoria turned to find a tall man in his early 30s watching her with calm gray eyes. Unlike most men at the gathering, he wasn't dressed in his Sunday best, but wore simple work clothes, clean but well worn. A cowboy's hat was held respectfully in his hands. "Easy for you to say," Victoria replied. "You're not the one being treated like a leper." The man's mouth twitched with what might have been amusement. "True enough. I'm Matthew Reed. Victoria Holloway." "I know. Everyone knows." He offered a wry smile. "Small towns." Victoria sighed. "And what have you heard about me, Mr. Reed?" "That you're a mail-order bride whose groom inconveniently died before you arrived. That you're stranded here with no money and no prospects." He paused. "And that you've been seeking work with no success." "All true, unfortunately." Matthew nodded toward a group of women who quickly looked away when Victoria glanced in their direction. "Don't let them discourage you. Half of them came west as mail-order brides themselves, though they'd rather die than admit it now. Yet they judge me. People fear what reminds them of their own vulnerability." He considered her for a moment. "I understand you were a teacher in Boston?" "Yes, for 3 years. I have a proposition for you, Miss Holloway." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I've had quite enough propositions since arriving here, Mr. Reed." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Nothing improper, I assure you. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My sister Mary has been living with me since my wife passed 2 years ago. She's been teaching my son and the children of my ranch hands, but she's returning east next month to care for our ailing mother. You're offering me a teaching position? Room, board, and a small salary. 6 children between the ages of 5 and 12. It's not Boston, but it's honest work. Victoria studied him cautiously. Why would you offer this to me? You don't know me. Mary suggested it when she heard about your situation. She was concerned about leaving the children's education unfinished. He shrugged. And I believe in giving folks a fair chance. It could be another deception, Victoria thought. But what choice did she have? When would you need an answer? Take your time. I'll be in town again on Saturday for supplies. You can let me know then. He placed his hat back on his head. Good evening, Miss Holloway. As he walked away, Victoria noticed several townspeople watching the exchange with obvious disapproval. If accepting Matthew Reed's offer meant escaping their judgment, it might be worth the risk. The next few days brought more whispers and closed doors. Victoria's attempts to find any work in town were met with increasing hostility. On Thursday, matters came to a head when she overheard 2 women talking loudly in the general store, clearly intending for her to hear. Can you imagine, coming all this way to marry a man she'd never met? What decent woman would do such a thing? Well, we know what kind would. Poor Douglas Weatherby had a lucky escape, if you ask me. Probably would have found his throat cut while he slept. Victoria had been examining a bolt of fabric, considering whether she could afford to make a new dress for teaching. She set it down and turned to face the women. I beg your pardon, but I can hear you quite clearly. The women, one middle-aged and plump, the other younger with a pinched expression, stared back defiantly. Mr. Weatherby and I corresponded for 6 months, Victoria continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He represented himself as a rancher in need of a wife, and I represented myself truthfully as a teacher seeking a new start after losing my family. There was nothing indecent about our arrangement. Decent women don't advertise themselves in newspapers, the younger woman sniffed. And decent women don't spread malicious gossip, Victoria countered. Good day, ladies. She left the store with her head high, but once outside, her composure crumbled. Tears threatened as she hurried back toward the boarding house. She collided with someone on the boardwalk. Lily Carter. Miss Holloway, are you all right? Victoria wiped her eyes hastily. Just some unpleasant women in the store. Lily took her arm. Come with me. I'll buy you a cup of coffee at the restaurant. Over coffee, Victoria confided Matthew Reed's offer. The Reed Ranch. Lily's eyes widened. That's one of the largest spreads in the county. Matthew Reed is well respected, even if he keeps to himself mostly since his wife died. So it's a legitimate offer? Not another deception. Oh, it's legitimate. The Reeds employ several families. They raise cattle and horses, quality stock. Lily leaned forward. You should accept. It would be a good position, and once you've established yourself there, the town's opinion of you would change. I'm not sure I care about the town's opinion anymore, Victoria said bitterly. You should. This is a small community. Reputations matter. Victoria considered this. Tell me more about Mr. Reed. He came west about 10 years ago, started with almost nothing, and built up one of the finest ranches around. His wife, Caroline, died of fever 2 years back, leaving him with their son. He's known as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Lily hesitated. Some find him intimidating. He doesn't suffer fools gladly, but I've never heard anyone speak ill of his character. By Saturday morning, Victoria had made her decision. She found Matthew Reed loading supplies into a wagon outside the general store. Mr. Reed, she called, approaching him. I'd like to accept your offer, if it still stands. He nodded, unsurprised. It does. Can you be ready to leave by noon? I'd like to reach the ranch before dark. Yes, I have very little to pack. As Victoria turned to go, Mr. Wilson emerged from the store. Reed, you're making a mistake taking in Weatherby's leftover. Town's got her measure already. Matthew's expression hardened. Wilson, I've been buying supplies from you for 8 years, but I can just as easily ride to Prescott for what I need. The storekeeper backed down immediately. Now, Reed, I didn't mean anything by it. Just looking out for you. I don't need looking out for. Miss Holloway will be teaching at my ranch, and I expect she'll be treated with respect when she's in town. He looked directly at Victoria. Noon, Miss Holloway. At precisely noon, Victoria stood outside the boarding house with her valise and a small bundle of additional belongings she'd purchased. Mrs. Perkins had been coldly efficient in calculating her bill, seeming relieved to see Victoria departing. Matthew arrived with his wagon and helped load her modest possessions. As they prepared to leave, a small crowd had gathered, some merely curious, others openly hostile. "Shame on you," Matthew Reed called one woman Victoria recognized from church. "Taking advantage of a desperate woman." "That's not what's happening here, Mrs. Jenkins," Matthew replied calmly. "Miss Holloway is filling the teaching position my sister is vacating." "Is that what they're calling it these days?" someone muttered. Victoria felt her face burning with humiliation. She hadn't expected to be welcomed with open arms in Cottonwood Springs, but neither had she anticipated such cruelty. As Matthew helped her onto the wagon seat, the town's barber called out, "How desperate does a woman have to be to go from one man's bed to another so quick?" Something in Matthew snapped. He turned toward the crowd, his eyes flashing dangerously. "One more word from any of you, and you'll answer to me." The sudden steel in his voice silenced the onlookers. Without another word, he climbed onto the wagon and flicked the reins, leaving the town and its judgments behind them. They traveled in silence for several miles, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the steady plodding of the horses the only sounds. Victoria stared straight ahead, too mortified to speak. Finally, Matthew cleared his throat. "I apologize for the town's behavior. That was inexcusable." "It's not your fault," Victoria said quietly. "Still, no one should be treated that way." He glanced at her. "For what it's worth, Mary received the same treatment when she first arrived to help me after Caroline died." Tongues wagged about a single woman living at a widower's ranch, even if she was his sister. Did it ever improve? Some. Mary made it clear she wouldn't be cowed by gossip. He smiled slightly. "I suspect you're made of the same material, Miss Holloway." Victoria wasn't sure about that, but she appreciated his confidence. As they continued their journey, the landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in scrubby vegetation, dramatic rock formations in the distance, and a vast sky that seemed to go on forever. "It's beautiful, in its way," she said, almost to herself. "Different from Boston, I imagine." "Very. But there's something honest about it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." Matthew nodded, seeming pleased by her observation. As the sun began its descent, they crested a hill, and Victoria caught her first glimpse of the Reed Ranch. A substantial main house of timber and stone stood proudly on a gentle rise, surrounded by several smaller buildings, corrals, and a large barn. Beyond stretched fenced pastureland where cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that gave the town its name. "Welcome to Cottonwood Creek Ranch," Matthew said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a boy of about 8 ran from the house, followed by a woman Victoria presumed was Mary Reed. "Pa, you're back," the boy called, racing toward the wagon. Matthew pulled the team to a stop and jumped down to sweep his son into his arms. "Michael, I'd like you to meet Miss Holloway. She's going to be your new teacher when Aunt Mary leaves." The boy regarded Victoria with curious blue eyes, his father's eyes. "Do you know arithmetic? Aunt Mary says I need lots of practice." Victoria smiled, her first genuine smile in days. "I do indeed. And reading, writing, history, and even a bit of Latin if you're interested." "What's Latin?" "It's an ancient language that many of our English words come from." Michael considered this. "Is it hard to learn?" "It can be challenging, but I find challenges are often the most rewarding things to overcome." The boy nodded seriously. "I like challenges." Mary Reed approached, extending her hand to Victoria. "Miss Holloway, I'm Mary Reed. We're so pleased you've agreed to come. The children have been worried about continuing their education after I leave." Victoria took her hand, struck by the genuine welcome in the woman's voice. "Thank you for suggesting me for the position. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Let's get you settled," Mary said warmly. "You must be exhausted after your journey and everything else." Something in her tone suggested Matthew had written to her about Victoria's reception in town. The main house was larger than it appeared from a distance, a central living area with a stone fireplace, a spacious kitchen, and several bedrooms branching off a main hallway. Mary showed Victoria to a comfortable room at the back of the house. "This will be yours," she explained. "It has its own entrance, so you'll have privacy." The children have lessons in the front room we've set up as a schoolroom. Victoria placed her valise on the bed, taking in the simple but well-made furniture, the clean curtains at the window, and a small bookshelf already containing several volumes. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "I'll leave you to freshen up. Supper's in an hour. The ranch hands and their families eat in the cookhouse, but Matthew, Michael, and I take our meals here. You're welcome to join us, or take your meals privately if you prefer." "I'd be happy to join you," Victoria said. After days of hostile stares at Mrs. Perkins' boarding house, the prospect of a civilized meal with people who didn't seem to despise her was appealing. That evening, Victoria enjoyed her first pleasant meal since arriving in Arizona territory. Matthew was quieter at home than he had been in town, but not unfriendly. Michael chattered enthusiastically about his pony and the new calf that had been born that morning, while Mary kept the conversation flowing with questions about Victoria's journey west and her teaching experience in Boston. After supper, while Mary and Victoria washed the dishes, Mary spoke quietly. "My brother told me how the town treated you. I'm sorry you experienced that." Victoria scrubbed a plate with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "I suppose I was naive to think people would be understanding." "It's not naivete to expect basic human decency," Mary countered. "But frontier towns can be harsh places, especially for women who arrive alone." "Mr. Reed, Matthew," he stood up for me. "I appreciate that." Mary smiled. "Matthew has always had a strong sense of justice. Too strong, sometimes. It's gotten him into trouble before." "What do you mean?" "Just that he doesn't back down when he believes he's right, even when it might be prudent to do so." Mary handed Victoria a towel to dry a serving bowl. "He was like that even as a boy. Our father called him stubborn as a mule and twice as determined." Victoria found herself curious about the quiet rancher. "Has he always lived out west?" "No, we grew up in Pennsylvania. Matthew came west after the war. He served in the Union Army. He wanted open spaces and a fresh start." Mary's expression grew thoughtful. "The war changed him. He came back quieter, more serious. Out here, he found purpose again." The next morning, Victoria met the children she would be teaching Michael, 3 children from one ranch family aged 5, 7, and 10, and 2 children aged 11 and 12 from another family. They gathered in the schoolroom, eyeing her with a combination of curiosity and wariness. Mary made the introductions, then observed as Victoria led her first lesson. By midday, Victoria felt she had begun to establish rapport with the children, and Mary seemed pleased. "You have a natural way with them," she commented as they ate a simple lunch while the children played outside. "I've been worried about leaving them without a proper teacher." "When do you depart for the East?" "In 3 weeks. That should give us time for a smooth transition." Mary hesitated. "There's something else you should know about teaching here." Victoria looked up from her plate. "Oh, Matthew insists that all the children learn practical skills alongside their book learning. The boys learn ranching, riding, roping, caring for animals, and the girls learn household management, gardening, and such. It's not just academic education he values." "That seems sensible in this environment," Victoria said. "I'm afraid I know little about ranching, however. No one expects you to teach those skills. Matthew and the children's fathers handle that part. But you should be prepared for days when lessons might be interrupted because a calf needs delivering or a garden needs harvesting before a frost." "I understand. Life doesn't pause for education out here." Mary smiled. "Exactly. The best teaching incorporates the reality of the children's lives." Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria settled into life at Cottonwood Creek Ranch. The routine was different from her teaching days in Boston, but she found satisfaction in adapting her methods to the needs of her frontier pupils. She began incorporating practical mathematics through measuring for fence posts or calculating feed for livestock. History lessons included the recent settlement of the Arizona territory, and science focused on the local flora and fauna. She saw little of Matthew during the days. He left before dawn and often returned after dark, busy with the endless tasks of managing the ranch. At supper, he would ask Michael about his lessons and occasionally ask Victoria how she was adjusting, but otherwise remained reserved. One evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Victoria found Matthew sitting on the porch, cleaning a rifle by lantern light. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure if she was intruding. He looked up. "Evening, Miss Holloway." "Good evening. I don't mean to disturb you." "You're not." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. Please, join me if you'd like. Victoria sat, watching as his capable hands worked the cleaning rod through the barrel of the Winchester rifle. Is that for hunting? Sometimes. Mostly protection. We've had trouble with wolves going after calves, and occasionally rustlers try their luck with our stock. He glanced at her. Does the rifle make you uncomfortable? No. My father taught me to shoot when I was a girl. He believed women should know how to protect themselves. Matthew looked surprised. A progressive man, your father. He was. Victoria smiled at the memory. He said a woman with a rifle commanded the same respect as a man with one, and sometimes needed it more. Wise words. Matthew set the cleaning rod aside. Mary tells me you're doing well with the children. They're bright and eager to learn. You've done a fine job raising Michael. He's thoughtful and curious, excellent qualities in a student. Caroline deserves the credit for that. She read to him every night from the time he was born. A shadow crossed Matthew's face at the mention of his late wife. I'm sorry for your loss, Victoria said softly. He nodded in acknowledgement. 2 years now. Some days it feels like yesterday. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes before Victoria spoke again. I wanted to thank you for defending me in town and for offering me this position. It means more than I can express. Matthew studied her in the lantern light. No need for thanks. You were being treated unjustly, and from what Mary tells me, we got the better end of the bargain with your teaching skills. Still, not many would have offered a position to someone with my circumstances. Your circumstances? His brow furrowed. You mean being a mail order bride whose intended died before you arrived? That's misfortune, not a character flaw. Victoria sighed. The town seems to see it differently. The town is wrong. His voice was firm. Coming west alone took courage. Seeking a new life through marriage isn't shameful. Half the women out here did the same. As you pointed out in town, Victoria remembered. People have short memories when it suits them. He reassembled the rifle with practiced movements. Will you return to Boston when you've saved enough? The question caught Victoria off guard. She hadn't considered it. I don't know. There's nothing for me there anymore. And here I have a purpose, at least for now. The children need education. Matthew nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Well, you have a place here as long as you want it. 3 days later, Victoria accompanied Mary to town for supplies. She had been dreading returning to Cottonwood Springs, but Mary insisted it would be easier with company. Besides, Mary added as they drove the buckboard toward town, once people see you're established at the ranch, they'll adjust their thinking. Victoria wasn't convinced, but didn't argue. When they arrived, she braced herself for cold stares and whispers, but the reception was different than before. Not warm, certainly, but the open hostility had been replaced by cautious acknowledgement. Mr. Wilson at the general store even greeted her by name. Word travels fast, Mary murmured as they selected fabric for new curtains in the schoolroom. Matthew must have made quite an impression when he stood up for you. I'm glad not to be treated like a pariah, but I don't want special treatment just because people fear Mr. Reed. It's not fear, exactly, Mary corrected. Respect. Matthew is a man of his word, and people know it. If he vouches for your character, that carries weight. As they loaded their purchases into the buckboard, Victoria noticed a group of men gathered outside the saloon, watching them. One broke away and approached a rough-looking man with a week's growth of beard and bloodshot eyes. You're Weatherby's mail order bride, ain't you? He slurred. Victoria stiffened. I don't see how that's any of your concern. Heard you moved out to Reed's place mighty quick. The man leered. Must have been desperate to spread your... That's enough, Jenkins, interrupted Sheriff Taylor, appearing from the direction of his office. Miss Holloway is employed as a teacher at the Reed Ranch. You do well to watch your tongue. The man Jenkins spat on the ground. Reed thinks he runs this county. Taking in strays now, is he? Mary stepped forward. We've finished our business here, Sheriff. Good day. As they drove away, Victoria's hands trembled. It seems not everyone respects Mr. Reed's judgment. Jenkins has a grudge. Matthew fired him last year for drinking on the job and mistreating the horses. Mary glanced at Victoria. Don't let him upset you. But Victoria was upset, not just by Jenkins' crude insinuations, but by the realization that her reputation would always be colored by how she had arrived in Cottonwood Springs. No matter how well she taught, no matter how properly she behaved, To some, she would always be Weatherby's mail-order bride. That evening, Victoria skipped supper, claiming a headache. She sat by her window, staring out at the darkening landscape, wondering if she would ever truly belong anywhere again. A knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. "Yes, it's Matthew. May I speak with you?" Surprised, Victoria crossed to the door and opened it. Matthew stood in the hallway, concern evident in his expression. "Mary told me what happened in town today. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. Just tired." He studied her face. "You don't look fine. May I come in for a moment?" Victoria hesitated, then stepped aside. It wasn't proper to receive a man in her bedroom, but the ranch was hardly Boston society, and the door remained open. Matthew remained standing just inside the doorway. "Jenkins is a troublemaker. His words aren't worth your distress." "It's not just him," Victoria admitted. "It's knowing that no matter what I do, some people will always see me as tainted somehow, just because of how I came here. People will think what they want to think. You can't control that. Easy for you to say. You're established, respected. I wasn't always." Matthew's voice was quiet. "When I first came here, people were suspicious of a former Union soldier setting up in territory that had Confederate sympathies. I had to prove myself, day after day, year after year." Victoria hadn't considered that. "How did you do it?" "By living honestly. By being the same man every day until people realized they could count on that man." He met her gaze directly. "Your character will speak for itself in time, Victoria." It was the first time he had used her given name, and somehow it made his words more personal, more meaningful. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded. "Get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning light." As he turned to leave, Victoria called after him. "Mr. Reed, Matthew, why did you really offer me this position? Was it just because Mary suggested it?" He paused in the doorway. "I recognized something in you that day at the social. A determination not to be broken by circumstances. I admire that quality." With a slight nod, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Victoria slept better that night than she had since arriving in Arizona territory. The following week brought Mary's departure. The children presented her with handmade gifts, and there were tears all around as she boarded the stagecoach for the first leg of her journey east. Victoria found herself the sole female adult in the main house, a situation that might have caused gossip in town, but Matthew addressed it straightforwardly. "Mrs. Martinez from the cookhouse will come up to the main house daily to help with meals and laundry," he informed Victoria. "Not because I doubt your propriety, but because I don't want to give anyone cause to question your reputation further." Victoria appreciated his thoughtfulness. "That's very considerate. It's practical. Your standing affects the children's education. If parents don't respect the teacher, the children won't either." Despite his pragmatic explanation, Victoria sensed there was more to his concern than just the children's education. In the weeks since her arrival, she had come to admire Matthew Reed, his quiet strength, his devotion to his son and his land, his unwavering sense of right and wrong. She told herself it was natural to feel grateful to the man who had rescued her from a desperate situation, nothing more. September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and changing routines on the ranch. The children's afternoon lessons sometimes gave way to helping with harvest or cattle work. Victoria found herself learning alongside them how to preserve vegetables from the garden, how to card wool from the few sheep kept for household use, how to identify plants with medicinal properties. One crisp Saturday, Matthew invited her to ride out with him and Michael to a distant part of the ranch. "The aspens on the North Ridge are turning gold," he explained. "It's worth seeing, and you've been working hard. A day away from the schoolroom would do you good." Victoria hadn't been on a horse since childhood, but Matthew selected a gentle mare for her and patiently refreshed her riding skills in the corral before they set out. Michael rode his pony alongside, peppering Victoria with facts about the ranch's geography and wildlife that he'd learned from his father. They rode for over an hour, gradually climbing to higher elevation. When they crested the ridge, Victoria gasped at the vista before her, a sweeping valley with a ribbon of creek winding through it, surrounded by hills where stands of aspen trees shimmered golden against the blue sky. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Matthew smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "This is my favorite view on the entire ranch." I come up here when I need to remember why all the hard work matters. They dismounted and sat on sun-warmed rocks while Michael explored nearby, collecting interesting stones and feathers. Matthew unpacked a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples that Mrs. Martinez had prepared. As they ate, Victoria found herself sharing stories from her teaching days in Boston, and Matthew spoke more than usual, telling her about his early days establishing the ranch, the harsh winters and dry summers he'd weathered, and his dreams for expanding the operation. I want to leave something substantial for Michael, he explained. Not just land and cattle, but a legacy of honest work and respect for the land. He's fortunate to have such a father, Victoria said sincerely. Matthew glanced at his son, who was attempting to coax a squirrel closer with bits of bread. I worry sometimes that he needs a woman's influence. Mary did her best, but she wasn't his mother. He seems well-adjusted to me. You've done admirably. Thank you. Matthew hesitated. May I ask you something personal? Of course. Why did you agree to marry Weatherby? You're educated, capable. Surely you had prospects in Boston. Victoria considered how to answer. After my parents died, I was lonely. Teaching filled my days, but evenings and Sundays stretched endlessly. Mr. Weatherby's letters painted a picture of a life with purpose, helping to build something lasting in this new territory. She smiled ruefully. And perhaps I was a bit romantic about the West. All those novels about brave pioneers and new beginnings. And now that you've seen the reality, it's harder than the novels suggest. Dirtier, more dangerous. She looked out over the valley, but also more beautiful. More authentic somehow. Matthew nodded, seeming to understand perfectly. On the ride back to the ranch, Victoria found herself watching Matthew as he rode slightly ahead, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sky. There was something undeniably appealing about his quiet competence, his moral certainty, his gentle guidance of his son. She quickly averted her gaze when he turned to check on her, hoping he hadn't noticed her attention. That evening, after Michael had gone to bed, Victoria sat on the porch with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, enjoying the crisp night air and brilliant stars. She heard Matthew's step before she saw him. Mind if I join you? He asked. Please do. He sat in the adjacent chair, setting his rifle against the wall beside him. I always check the property before turning in, he explained, noticing her glance at the weapon. Is there danger? Not usually, but preparation prevents trouble. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, coyotes in the distance, the gentle lowing of cattle in the nearby pasture, the creaking of the windmill as a breeze stirred. Thank you for today, Victoria said finally. It was a lovely outing. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Michael was excited to show you his favorite places on the ranch. He's a wonderful boy, so curious and kind. Matthew smiled in the darkness. He likes you very much. He told me today that you explain things better than Aunt Mary did. Victoria laughed softly. I'm not sure that's true, but I'm flattered. Another comfortable silence fell between them before Matthew spoke again. Victoria, there's something I should tell you. Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. Yes. I received a letter from the school board in Prescott yesterday. They're opening a new school and seeking teachers for the spring term. The pay would be better than what I can offer you, and you'd have the society of a larger town. He paused. I haven't mentioned it to the children yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Victoria felt a strange disappointment. You think I should apply? I think you should know your options. You're an excellent teacher, and while we value you here, I don't want you to stay out of a sense of obligation if there's a better opportunity for you. I see. Victoria considered her response carefully. That's very thoughtful of you. May I think about it? Of course. There's no rush to decide. As October progressed, Victoria found herself increasingly torn about the teaching opportunity in Prescott. On one hand, it represented financial security and a chance to rebuild her reputation in a larger community where her arrival as a mail-order bride might not follow her. On the other hand, she had grown attached to her pupils at the ranch and had come to think of Cottonwood Creek as home. And there was Matthew. She could no longer deny, at least to herself, that she had developed feelings for the reserved rancher. His quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, his tenderness with his son all had combined to create an attraction she hadn't anticipated. Yet he had given no indication that he saw her as anything other than his son's teacher and perhaps a friend. One afternoon, Victoria dismissed the children early as dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Michael hurried to help the ranch hands secure livestock before the storm, while Victoria closed the shutters on the schoolroom windows. As she finished, the first heavy drops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. She dashed toward the main house, but was soaked by the time she reached the porch. Inside, she found Matthew standing by the fireplace, adding logs to build up the flames against the sudden chill the storm had brought. He turned as she entered, water dripping from her hair and clothes. "You're drenched," he said, concern in his voice. "You should change before you catch a chill." "The storm came on so quickly," Victoria replied, shivering slightly. Matthew crossed to a cabinet and pulled out a woolen blanket. "Here, I'll stoke the fire while you change." Victoria retreated to her room, peeling off her wet clothing and putting on a dry dress. She toweled her hair as best she could, then wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and returned to the main room. Matthew had built up the fire to a cheerful blaze and placed a kettle for tea on the hook above the flames. "Better?" he asked as she settled into a chair near the hearth. "Much, thank you." She held her hands out to the warmth. "Where's Michael?" "Helping in the barn." "He'll be fine, he's with Rodriguez." Thunder crashed overhead, and Victoria jumped slightly. Matthew smiled. "Not fond of storms." "Not particularly. They make me feel small. They remind us of our place in the grand scheme, that's certain." He poured hot water into a teapot. "But there's something cleansing about them, too. They clear the air." Victoria accepted the cup of tea he offered. "You have a philosophical streak, Mr. Reed." "Matthew," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" "Matthew," she agreed, liking the way his name felt on her lips. As the storm raged outside, they sat by the fire talking about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they still harbored. Victoria found herself sharing things she had told no one since her parents' deaths: her love of poetry, her secret wish to write stories of her own someday, her fear that she might never find a true home again. Matthew listened attentively, offering his own confidences in return: his nightmares from the war that still occasionally plagued him, his worries about raising Michael without a mother's influence, his hope to expand the ranch to include orchards that could supply fruit to the growing towns in the territory. "Have you decided about the Prescott position?" he asked eventually. Victoria stared into the flames. "Not yet. It's a significant opportunity." "It is. You deserve it." She looked up at him. "But..." A slight smile touched his lips. "Is there a but in my tone?" "I thought perhaps there might be." Matthew set his cup aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Victoria, I would never presume to influence your decision. Your future is yours to determine. But if you had a preference," she pressed. He held her gaze for a long moment. "If I had a preference, I would wish for you to stay. The children need you. Michael needs you." He paused. "And I have grown accustomed to your company." It wasn't a declaration of affection, but something in his eyes made Victoria's breath catch. Before she could respond, the door burst open, and Michael rushed in, soaking wet and excited. "Pa." Lightning struck the old cottonwood by the creek. "Rodriguez says we'll need to check if it started any fires once the rain stops." The moment between Victoria and Matthew passed. He rose to help his son out of his wet clothes, and the conversation turned to practical matters of the storm and its effects on the ranch. That night, lying in bed listening to the rain, Victoria considered Matthew's words. "I have grown accustomed to your company." It wasn't a romantic declaration, but from a man as reserved as Matthew Reed, perhaps it revealed more than it seemed. Or perhaps she was reading too much into it, seeing what she wished to see. The next morning dawned clear and fresh after the storm. Victoria rose early to help assess any damage to the schoolroom, but found Matthew had already repaired a shutter that had been torn loose by the wind. "Good morning," he greeted her. "I hope you slept well despite the storm." "Well enough," she replied. "Thank you for fixing the shutter." He nodded, hammering in a final nail. "I need to ride out to check the north pasture today. Some of the cattle may have scattered in the storm. Of course, the children and I will manage." He hesitated, seeming about to say something more, but Michael called from the main house that breakfast was ready, and the moment passed. The day proceeded normally, with lessons in the morning and practical skills in the afternoon. That evening, Victoria wrote a letter to the school board in Prescott, inquiring about the details of the teaching position. She didn't commit to anything but wanted more information before making a decision. As October gave way to November, preparations began for the coming winter. The ranch was a flurry of activity, harvesting the last vegetables from the garden, smoking meat, mending buildings, and gathering firewood. Victoria found herself fully integrated into these efforts, working alongside Mrs. Martinez to preserve food and teaching the children while they helped with age-appropriate tasks. One evening, as Victoria sat on the porch mending one of Michael's shirts, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sheriff Taylor riding toward the house. Matthew emerged from the barn and met the sheriff in the yard. Victoria couldn't hear their conversation, but Matthew's posture grew tense. After a few minutes, the sheriff rode away, and Matthew approached the porch, his expression grim. "Is something wrong?" Victoria asked. "Jenkins and some other troublemakers have been making threats in town. Nothing specific, but the sheriff thought I should know." "Threats against you? What?" Matthew sat beside her, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of agitation. "Jenkins blames me for his inability to find work. He's been drinking heavily and talking about teaching Reed a lesson." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Do you think he would actually try to harm you or the ranch?" "Probably just drunk talk. But I've asked the men to keep an extra watch, just in case." He looked at her directly. "I don't want you to worry, but you should be alert. Don't go anywhere on the property alone for a while." "Of course." She hesitated. "Is this because of me? Jenkins made those comments when I was in town with Mary." "This isn't because of you. Jenkins has had a grudge against me since I fired him. You're just a convenient excuse for him to focus his resentment." Matthew's voice softened. "But I am sorry you've been drawn into it." Over the next few days, Victoria noticed increased vigilance around the ranch, men working in pairs, rifles kept close at hand, the dogs more alert. Matthew rode the boundaries of the property each evening and kept his Winchester by the door at night. On Saturday, Matthew needed to go into town for supplies and to speak with the sheriff. "I'd prefer you and Michael stay here," he told Victoria over breakfast. "Rodriguez and his sons will be close by if you need anything." "We'll be fine," she assured him. "We have lessons to catch up on anyway." After Matthew left, Victoria and Michael spent the morning in the schoolroom. Around midday, they returned to the main house for lunch. As Victoria was setting bread and cheese on the table, she heard a horse approaching at a gallop. Looking out the window, she saw one of the ranch hands, young Pedro Rodriguez, racing toward the house. She met him on the porch. "Pedro, what's wrong?" The young man dismounted quickly. "Miss Holloway, my father sent me to warn you. We spotted 3 riders heading this way from the East Ridge. One of them is Jenkins." Victoria's heart raced. "Where are the other men?" "Working the south pasture. Father has gone to get them, but it will take time." Pedro glanced nervously toward the eastern horizon. "The riders will be here soon." Victoria made a swift decision. "Pedro, take Michael to your family's cabin. Stay there until Mr. Reed or your father comes for you." "Yes, miss. What about you?" "I'll be fine. Just hurry." She re-entered the house, calling for Michael. "Change of plans. You're going to spend the afternoon with Pedro's family." Michael looked puzzled. "Why? Is something wrong?" "Just a precaution. Your father wants to make sure you're safe while he's in town." She kept her voice steady as she helped him into his coat. "Go with Pedro now. Be good and do as the Rodriguez family tells you." Once Michael was safely away, Victoria closed and latched the shutters on all the windows. Her heart pounded as she tried to think clearly. Matthew's rifle was gone. He had taken it to town. But she knew he kept a revolver in a box on the top shelf of his wardrobe. She had seen him cleaning it once. Quickly, she went to his room and found the box. Inside was a Colt revolver and a box of ammunition. Victoria's hands shook slightly as she loaded the weapon, grateful for her father's long-ago lessons. She checked that it was ready to fire, then returned to the main room to wait. She didn't have to wait long. Soon, she heard horses approaching and men's voices, loud, slurred voices that confirmed her fears. Jenkins and his companions were drunk and looking for trouble. "Reed!" Jenkins shouted from the yard. "Come out and face me, you self-righteous bastard." Victoria remained silent, hoping they might think no one was home and leave. "His horse ain't here. another voice observed. Must be in town. Then we'll leave him a message, Jenkins replied. Burn the barn. That'll show him. Victoria's blood ran cold. The barn contained not only livestock, but winter feed for the animals. Losing it would be devastating for the ranch. She moved to the window and carefully peered through a crack in the shutters. 3 men stood in the yard, Jenkins and 2 others she didn't recognize. All were armed, and Jenkins was swinging a bottle of whiskey as he spoke. Better yet, he was saying, let's smoke out that mail-order whore he's keeping. Bet she's inside. Victoria stepped back from the window, her heart hammering. She gripped the revolver tightly, trying to steady her breathing. She had to protect the ranch until help arrived. Moving to the front door, she called out, Mr. Jenkins, you and your friends need to leave. Mr. Reed is expected back any minute with the sheriff. A burst of laughter answered her. Hear that, boys? The schoolmarm's trying to scare us. Jenkins' voice grew harder. Come on out, teacher. We just want to talk. I have a gun, Mr. Jenkins. Please leave before anyone gets hurt. More laughter. She's bluffing. Reed wouldn't leave a woman alone with a gun. Victoria heard footsteps on the porch. The door handle rattled as someone tried to open it. Last warning, she called, her voice surprisingly steady. Leave now. The door shuddered as someone threw their weight against it. Victoria raised the revolver, aiming at the door. When it burst open, she fired a shot into the ceiling. The man in the doorway, not Jenkins, but one of his companions, froze in shock. The next one won't be a warning, Victoria said firmly. Back away. The man retreated hastily. She's got a gun for Raoul, Jenkins. Give it here, woman, Jenkins snarled, appearing in the doorway. You don't have the stomach to use it. Victoria kept the revolver leveled at his chest. Don't test me, Mr. Jenkins. I grew up with guns, and I know how to use them. Something in her voice or expression must have convinced him she was serious. Jenkins hesitated, swaying slightly from drink. This ain't over, he muttered. Reed can't hide behind a woman's skirts forever. Mr. Reed isn't hiding. He's in town speaking with the sheriff about your threats. Victoria maintained her aim. Now back away and leave this property. For a tense moment, Jenkins stood his ground, his bloodshot eyes filled with hatred. Then the third man called from the yard. Jenkins, let's go. This ain't worth hanging for. With a final glare, Jenkins backed away. Victoria held her position until she heard the men mounting their horses and riding off. Only then did she lower the revolver, her hands suddenly shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She sank into a chair, the reaction setting in now that the immediate danger had passed. She wasn't sure how much time had elapsed before she heard horses again, multiple riders approaching at speed. Fearing Jenkins had returned with reinforcements, Victoria raised the revolver once more. But the voice that called out was Matthew's. Victoria. Michael. She hurried to the door. We're safe. Michael is with the Rodriguez family. Matthew dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, rushing toward her. Sheriff Taylor and 2 other men followed close behind. Matthew took in the broken door frame, the revolver in Victoria's hand, and her pale face. What happened? He demanded, his voice tight with concern. Victoria explained quickly. Matthew's expression darkened with each word, his jaw clenching in anger. I'll find them, the sheriff promised. Breaking and entering, threatening a woman, they won't get away with it. After the sheriff and his men departed to track Jenkins and his companions, Matthew insisted on checking Victoria for injuries despite her assurances that she was unharmed. I'm fine, truly, she said as he examined a small cut on her hand she hadn't even noticed receiving. Just shaken. Matthew's eyes met hers, intense with emotion. You could have been killed. They were drunk and foolish, not murderers. Drunk men are unpredictable. He gently wrapped a handkerchief around her cut. You were incredibly brave. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. His hands lingered on hers. When I heard what happened, Victoria, I've never been so frightened in my life. Something in his voice made her look up sharply. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. I should go get Michael, he said after a moment, releasing her hands. He must be worried. Of course. That evening, after Michael had been reassured and put to bed, Victoria found herself unable to sleep. The day's events kept replaying in her mind. She wrapped a shawl around her nightdress and went to sit on the porch, needing the calm of the night air. She was surprised to find Matthew already there, staring out into the darkness. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "I can't sleep." She sat in the chair beside him. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Jenkins standing in the doorway." Matthew nodded in understanding. "It will fade with time." They sat in silence for a while before he spoke again. "The sheriff found them at a line shack about 5 miles from here, passed out drunk. They're in jail now." "Good." "Victoria." Matthew turned to face her fully. "I need to say something." She waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. "When I rode up today and saw the broken door. When I thought you might be hurt." He paused, struggling for words. "I realized something I've been trying to deny for weeks." "What?" she whispered. "That you've become more to me than Michael's teacher. More than a friend." His voice was low, intense. "The thought of losing you. I couldn't bear it." Victoria's breath caught. "Matthew, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I know you have the opportunity in Prescott to consider. I know your reputation here has been compromised through no fault of your own. I wouldn't blame you for wanting a fresh start elsewhere." He took a deep breath. "But before you decide, I want you to know that I care for you deeply. That I believe we could build a good life together, if you were willing." Victoria reached for his hand in the darkness. "I've been struggling with the decision about Prescott because I didn't want to leave you and Michael. I've grown to care for both of you more than I thought possible." Matthew's fingers tightened around hers. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that I don't need Prescott to have a fresh start. I've already found one here, with you." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'm not a poetic man, Victoria. I can't offer pretty words. But I can promise to respect you, to protect you, to build a life with you if you'll have me." "Those are the words that matter," she whispered. Matthew stood, drawing her up with him. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, then deepening as Victoria responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally broke apart, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Be my wife. Help me raise Michael. Share this life with me." "Yes," Victoria answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in the ranch's main room, with the children, ranch hands, and their families as witnesses. Sheriff Taylor rode out to perform the ceremony, and even Mrs. Perkins and Lily came from town, the former offering stiff congratulations while the latter embraced Victoria warmly. "I knew Matthew Reed would see what others missed," Lily whispered. "A woman of true character." After the simple ceremony and celebration, Victoria found a moment alone with her new husband on the porch where they had shared so many conversations. "Happy?" Matthew asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely." She leaned against him. "Though I must admit, this isn't how I imagined finding a husband when I left Boston." Matthew chuckled. "No? You didn't envision being stranded in a hostile town, rescued by a taciturn rancher, and defending his property with his own revolver?" "Strangely, no." She smiled up at him. "But I wouldn't change a moment of it now. Nor would I." He became serious. "You know there may still be talk in town. People have long memories. Let them talk. We know the truth of who we are and what we've built together." Victoria looked out over the rancher home now, in every sense. "Besides, I think I've proven I can handle whatever comes our way." "That you have, Mrs. Reed." Matthew pulled her closer. "That you most certainly have." 5 years later, Victoria sat on the same porch, watching Matthew teaching their 3-year-old daughter Rose to ride her first pony while Michael, now 13, offered enthusiastic advice from the sidelines. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The orchards Matthew had dreamed of were beginning to bear fruit, the cattle herd had grown, and the main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Victoria's hand rested on her swollen belly where their third child grew. Life in the Arizona Territory remained challenging. Droughts, harsh winters, and occasional troubles with rustlers or wild animals, but she had found a happiness she had never imagined possible when she stepped off that stagecoach in Cottonwood Springs. The town's attitude had gradually shifted as well. The same people who had once whispered behind her back now greeted her respectfully when she came to town with Matthew and the children. Some had even apologized for their earlier treatment, though Victoria had long since forgiven them. She smiled as Rose squealed with delight when her pony took a few steps forward. Matthew looked up, catching Victoria's eye across the yard, and the love in his gaze still made her heart skip after all these years. The mail-order bride who had been laughed out of town had found her place after all, not through the man who had brought her west, but through the one who had seen her worth when others could not. The one who had given her his name, his trust, and yes, even his rifle when it mattered most. And that, Victoria Reed knew, was worth every hardship she had endured to find it.